Okay, good evening, everyone. Please, if you can find your seats, that'd be great. We're going to get started. Hello, my name is Rebecca Bear. I am the president and CEO of the Seattle Parks Foundation, and we are thrilled that you all are here tonight to listen in on an important conversation around climate and climate solutions in our city and our region. We also know that you are here on a very big night for the Mariners, so we're grateful for you all choosing this, and you can check your phones for scores if you want to. First, I want to acknowledge that we are gathering tonight on unceded Coast Salish territories and ancestral lands, specifically of the Duwamish, Muckleshoot, Snoqualmie, Suquamish, Tulalip, and they have all been stewarding these lands since time immemorial. And we owe a debt to our Indigenous partners in the Coast Salish communities. And so tonight, this event is brought to you in partnership with the Seattle Parks Foundation, Birds Connect Seattle, the Cascade Bicycle Club, Transportation Choices Coalition, and the Mountains to Sound Greenway Trust. We are all here tonight because we care tremendously about the future of climate change, and the health of our region. And it's partly why we all invested in this event, to get our candidates to talk to us a little bit about their vision and their leadership in the future. Each of those groups are here tonight, representatives, and so there will be a break around 7:30 or 7:15. During that time, feel free to get up. There's snacks. There's also folks you can talk to from those organizations. You can also, if the candidates are still here, you can chat with them as well. A little bit of housekeeping before we get started. Outside are the restrooms. There are 2 restrooms right outside the door, and then if you take a left-hand turn, there's larger restrooms in the community center as well. The evening will be split into 2 parts. The first part was with our mayoral candidates tonight. And that will take about 45 minutes of questions and answers. Many of you have submitted questions, and those have been given to our moderator, who has then culled them and brought them together into the questions we'll be asking candidates this evening. After that first 45 minutes, we will take a break, and then the next candidates will come on at 7:30, so for King County Executive. We took all of the questions in advance, so we're not doing Q&A tonight. We are doing a live stream of this event, so we're trying to keep it moving so folks can keep watching from home and virtually. So now, it's my pleasure to introduce our moderator tonight. I have to use my glasses to read his bio. Syris Valentine is an independent climate journalist committed to shedding light on community-led solutions that reduce emissions, build resilience, and advance social justice. In 2024, Syris was a Climate Solutions Fellow at Grist magazine, and their work has also appeared in The Atlantic, The Scientific American, Smithsonian Magazine, and High Country News, and the South Seattle Emerald, and more. So thank you for being here tonight, Syris, for all of your journalistic work on these questions tonight and moderating the event. And I'm going to hand it over to you.
Everyone. So as Rebecca talked about a little bit, this is, and you saw when you signed up, this is just a candidate forum, so it's not going to be a debate. So just to get into a little bit of the format so you all know what to expect, we talked about this with the candidates as well. With each of the questions that we have, each one is going to be posed to both of the candidates, and they'll each get 2 minutes to respond to those questions, and potentially if there's a need to clarify anything that either of them has said, they'll get potentially 1 minute follow-up if I have to ask a clarifying question at any point. And yeah, so I've already prepped all those questions. Our candidates tonight are Miss Katie Wilson and Mr. Bruce Harrell. And by way of giving them a chance to introduce themselves, I'll just ask a sort of a broader question, if you will, for both of y'all to address. So starting, I'll have Ms. Wilson, you start. So in this moment, when the federal government is gutting efforts to understand and address the climate crisis, at the same time that recent and the most up-to-date research is showing that the world is beginning to reach and surpass certain climate tipping points, how do you view the role of local government, and in particular the office of the mayor, in advancing climate action?
Thank you for that. So hi, everyone. It is wonderful to be here tonight. My name is Katie Wilson, and I'm running for mayor. Okay, thank you. And I'll just say that, in my role with the Transit Riders Union over the last 14 years, part of that work has been fighting for meaningful climate action. And I've also been privileged to work with other climate and transportation organizations in the Move All Seattle Sustainably Coalition since 2018, fighting for a sustainable transportation system and for urgency on climate change. So I think that in the context of, yes, a federal government that clearly does not care, to say the least, I think that local action becomes even more important. And it is our duty at the city level to show what real climate action looks like, what it means to transform our transportation system, what it means to build dense, affordable housing so that people can afford to live near where they work. And I think also really being transparent about our progress is very important. And one of the things that I've been a little bit disturbed by is the lack of recent data on how we are doing. I mean, we know that we are very, very far from our climate emissions reduction goals that we've established in this city. But to my knowledge, the most recent emissions data that we have is from 2022. And similarly, thinking about our largest source of climate emissions, our transportation system, we also have established ambitious mode shift goals. And I don't think we actually have mode shift data since 2019. So I think it's really important that we are tracking our progress and that we're taking bold action to shift our climate emissions and also improving resiliency for communities that are already being impacted by climate change, of which we have many in Seattle.
Thank you. Mr. Harrell, the same question to you. How do you view the role of local government and the office of the mayor in advancing climate action?
Simply put, and once again, thank you for being here. Simply put, we have to be the leaders. I mean, there's no other way to say that we have an administration that denies climate change, that we as a city, or Seattle, we are actually leading the way. We have been internationally recognized by Bloomberg Philanthropies as one of the top performing C40 cities. We've actually received a national award, international award. When I became mayor, I looked at a few things. One is I looked at the tree ordinance that we'll talk about, I'm sure, in depth. It hadn't been renewed for 15 years. I was actually part of the council when we looked at that under Councilmember Conlon. And I said, we have to do better than that. And so we renewed it for the first time in 15 years. We looked at the climate action plan. That hadn't been renewed since 2012. So I said, let's do the hard work and understand this is a time where we're climbing out of COVID, we're climbing out of the George Floyd murder, but I said we have to prioritize this. And so if you look at the Office of Sustainability and Environment, who Jessin Farrell was the head of that, she is actually now a deputy mayor, largely because of her firm commitment toward fighting climate change. So cities have to lead the way, and you have to invest in it as well. So I think during the questions and answers, you'll see exactly how we are leading it. But we didn't want to leave much to ambiguity. We wanted to set the stake out there. For example, for tree canopy, we wanted to say 30% by the year 2037. It was a very aggressive goal. I asked my team, where are we losing tree canopy? Who's the biggest culprits? Are we measuring it? What is the data that supports what we're doing right or what we're doing wrong? And we opened up the books. Never afraid of an audit. We looked at the 2021 tree canopy report, and that became our basis for all of the great work that we're doing that we'll talk about this evening. I think you recently heard about the recent executive order on trees that I recently issued.
Thank you, Mr. Harrell. You both sort of brought this up in different ways, but like the importance of leadership from the local government, and in particular, Ms. Wilson, you brought up the most recent emissions inventory, which came out at the end of 2024, but was looking at 2022 emissions. So one of the the results that came out of that particular emissions inventory was that according to the Seattle Office of Sustainability, transportation is the #1 contributor to greenhouse gas emissions in Seattle and accounts for around 60% of the city's emissions. But with that inventory, it also showed that there had been an increase in transportation emissions since a dip in 2020 that was primarily associated with COVID restrictions. So at the same time, there's also an aggressive goal at the city level to reach 90% zero emission trips by 2030. So we're curious to find out a little bit more about, if elected, what steps you would take to help Seattle get back on track to reach that goal. And Mr. Harrell, we'll start with you with this particular question. If that's
I'm sorry,
okay.
thought you were talking to her on the question. So the first thing we did, again, according to our climate action plan, while cars have been the largest pollutants, of course, we actually looked at buildings as well. So we created what's called the Building Emissions Performance Standard, looking at buildings were culprits too, and we set some very aggressive goals there and gave them many tools at a time where even vacancies was an issue for them. We thought that was the right time. With respect to cars, if you look at the transportation levy, the $1.55 billion levy that you all passed graciously, we looked at air and our roads as sort of a shared asset. And we use all of the data to see how we can actually reduce the emissions. And again, using technology, using measurements, we're doing a pretty good job. The fact of the matter is this, that cars will be electric, buses will be electric. And when, for example, when we change some of our building standards to eliminate some of the parking requirements, we get a lot of pushback because people still want parking spots. When I produce the data that I think in the last 5 years has been nearly 100,000 cars less. So we are building a future without cars. I'm very proud to be endorsed by Washington Bikes and Transportation Choices based on what we're doing with respect to slowing down traffic, making sure that we're trying to encourage different modes of transportation. So everything that we do has been geared toward our transportation goals, and I think we're on track to do a phenomenal job. We get this here in Seattle. I mean, this is one of the issues that we understand climate change here. If you look at even these community centers that we've converted to resilience hubs as an example under our administration. So everything we do, we're looking at opportunities to make sure that we are being environmentally sustainable.
Thank you, Mr. Harrell. Ms. Wilson?
Yeah, so I think there are a number of things that we need to do to get us back. I'm not going to say on track, because the idea of reaching our 23 goals is pretty daunting at this point, but I think getting us moving as rapidly as possible in the right direction. So one thing is housing affordability and density, right? And you think about transportation being the largest source of our emissions. A lot of the reason for that is that people are not able to afford to live near where they work, near where they shop, near where they visit friends and family, and so instead people are commuting in long distances from South King County, even from outside King County for jobs in Seattle. So the more that we can aggressively increase density and increase especially affordable housing in Seattle, the lower our emissions will be from transportation. In terms of more directly encouraging mode shift, everything that we can do to shift our transportation infrastructure in the direction of public transit, making it safe and comfortable and efficient to walk and bike and roll around the city. So that's a whole other area that we need to aggressively pursue. And of course, expanding mass transit. We're going to have an opportunity next year with the renewal of the Seattle Transportation Benefit District. But the more that we can get people riding public transit, make transit competitive with driving and ubiquitous. I also think that there's a lot we can do around transportation demand management. For example, we can improve our commute trip reduction program. I support legislation that would require at least large employers to subsidize transit passes for their workers. E-bike rebate program, we have a state program that was immediately oversubscribed. If we could do that locally, e-bikes have a proven way to get people out of their cars, so let's do more of that. And I think it's very interesting to consider congestion pricing, right? That's politically a hard path, but you look at the way that it's gone down in New York City, and that could potentially be a transformative policy that would also generate revenue to accelerate this transformation.
Very cool. Thank you. You both talked in different ways a little bit about this question of revenue and taxes going towards funding for public transportation. The Seattle Transit Measure, as you're sort of alluding to, Ms. Wilson, was approved by Seattle voters back in 2020, but is set to expire in early 2027, at which point it would need to be renewed. And it currently raises $50 million per year for transit service and access improvements through a 0.15% sales tax. And this question is obviously for both of you, but Ms. Wilson, we'll start with you. If you were elected, would you support renewing the transit measure? And if so, how would you like to see those funds invested?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I support renewing that measure. I think we should also consider expanding it. We also have, I believe, car tab fee authority that is unused, so we could potentially make this a bigger measure. It is unfortunate that the tax sources that we have authorization for in the Seattle Transportation Benefit District are regressive, so I don't love the idea of raising regressive taxes, but I do think it's a conversation that we should have. So definitely support expanding it. I also support working closely with the next county executive to see how we can chart a course to another regional transit ballot measure. I mean, our local transit ballot measure was passed in 2014 after a King County measure failed, and that means that Seattle has more robust transit service than the rest of the county, so I think we really need to get back to a point where we're investing more in public transit around the county because we do have a regional system. In terms of what to do with that money, obviously service, and we have all kinds of needs, right? I think travel habits have somewhat changed coming out of the pandemic, where there's a lot more kind of all-day trips, and I think taking a really good look, obviously in partnership with Metro, with how we should invest our service hours to really accommodate and encourage those new travel patterns is going to be really important. I always hear the complaints about our hub and spoke system and how we don't have enough good like east-west connections, and so improving that. Nighttime service is really important. We also have some affordable transit programs that are funded through this measure, including passes for some people in Seattle Housing Authority buildings. I think getting more unlimited transit passes into people's hands is great, and I would love to see more investment in that, maybe in like all affordable housing buildings in Seattle, right? Subsidized housing, maybe that comes with an unlimited transit pass. So I think there are a ton of exciting things that we could be investing this measure in, and it'll be really exciting to have conversations around how to design the measure so that it has the greatest impact.
Mr. Harold, this is a question to you.
Sure. Of course, I was one of the builders of the first transit measure, and we have a lot of success to build on. And that's exactly what we do and will do, and exactly what I'll support. We built frequent bus service, free Orca cards, particularly for low-income residents, particularly if Sound Transit light rail is going and is fully expanded. We'll increase the amount of transit by households within a 10-minute walk. That is our goal that we've set. We'll have all bus lines meet our target frequency goals. We'll increase equitable transit in low-income areas, realizing we have to have an equity lens in what we do. We'll expand bus lanes with this particular measure. We'll have safer pedestrian crossings. We are doing an analysis of our areas that are unsafe, making sure we invest that money accordingly. And of course, we'll expand bus rapid transit. That is a goal that we've set, and that's what this transit measure will do. What we will not do is some things that we're already using monies for in our transportation budget. We decided on a goal to have 3 low-pollution neighborhoods from a climate standpoint, particularly with an equity lens again. We will continue to invest our regular transportation dollars with that. We'll accelerate our electric charging infrastructure. As I said earlier, we are moving toward that. I think we all understand that, and so we want to be ready and prepared and want to be the best prepared cities. And the transportation demand management system that my opponent talked about, that's a very good idea, and that's one thing that we have been doing. That is exactly looking at the choke points of the city, where we have excess capacity, where we need to go, and we'll continue to do that work. But with respect to the transit measure that's up in early 2027, we'll build on the successes we've had, and I look forward to seeing that passed.
Thank you. I am actually going to ask one quick follow-up of you, Mr. Harrell, because you mentioned, I'm just actually using this as an opportunity to ask an audience question I wasn't sure I was going to get to, because an audience member brought up a question about electric vehicle charging stations, because they mentioned that there is a significant sort of delay and a backlog of getting EV stations connected. So I'm curious if you can speak a little bit more about what you see yourself being able to do to address that, to make sure electric vehicle charging stations are being installed.
Yeah. One of the challenges we've had is, and you even look at how we measure trees as an example. I have around 6 or 7 departments sort of doing that work. One of the problems we've had with electrification is we have many departments sort of have a part of that. And so in our one Seattle approach, what we first had to sort of decide is who sort of owns it. Is it City Light? Is it SDOT? It might be around a park facility. There's always other infrastructure issues in building. And so what we had to do was sort of simplify the process by which we could build it out. And it took a little time because, and the other thing is we've been successful in getting some federal funds doing some of this work, but that is questionable at best. So we've tried to look at the internal systems on how we could build out the system, and I think now we pretty much have it, and so it took a little while to do that. And quite frankly, that was what I inherited. When I started looking at our electrification needs and I looked at what departments were responsible, they weren't coordinating amongst themselves, at least to my satisfaction.
Very cool. Thank you. Our next question is still on the sort of general theme of transportation, but both of you have talked in different ways about the importance of mode shifting in a sort of car-free future. And Mountain Sound Greenway Trust in particular brought up the fact that major investments have been made in safe and off-road trails for biking and walking throughout the city, yet many of these facilities do not yet connect to each other in a holistic way, but many people don't feel safe biking on roads shared with cars. So Ms. Wilson, we'll start with you since I had the quick follow-up with Mr. Harrell. What will you do to support a fully connected, safe off-road trail system for all ages and ability throughout the city?
I love this. So I personally, until I had my daughter a couple of years ago, my bicycle was my primary form of transportation. I don't own a car, and although I am a leader of the Transit Riders Union, I actually, almost never rode public transit because riding my bike was almost always the faster way to go. And now, of course, with my toddler, I'm always riding our buses and trains, and I love it. But anyway, yeah, so safe and connected bike infrastructure is really important to me. It definitely, I'm kind of an intrepid bicyclist, but I totally understand people who do not get on their bike because they do not feel safe in many places in our city. And yeah, so it'll be a very high priority for me if I'm successful in this race to be building out our connected and protected bike network and off-road trails. Are you talking about specifically like trails through parks?
Yeah,
And
that's what
yeah.
MTS brought up. Yeah.
Yeah, no, very much on board with this goal, and obviously looking at our recently passed transportation levy and making sure that we're making the most effective use possible of the funds in that levy for bicycle infrastructure to be building out that connected network. And I don't know, whether if we're talking about bike infrastructure in parks, whether this is something where our parks budget could kind of play a role as well, but very on board with the goal and would like to see this happen.
Awesome. Thank you. Same question for you, Mr. Harrell.
I have to impress upon you how hard it was to get a $1.55 billion transportation across the line, a levy. Let me tell you why. Because when I inherited the job and I won the job, we still lived in a city by which cars are fighting with bikes, and bikes are perhaps competing with transit, and people looked at the different forms of transportation and they didn't talk to each other very well. And what I tried to do is change the conversation, and negotiating a package of $1.55 billion, leading with safety first, and then reliability and then connectivity was the package we put together. Again, I earlier said that the cars per household was going down. I looked at my statistics in 2017. There were 463 vehicles. That went all the way down to 388,000 in 2023. And I used data like this to suggest where we're building for in the future. We put over $430 million in for these types of safety mechanisms. We're very proud that we had a drop in pedestrian deaths. Our death count was below 10. It was half of what it was in 2021. In 2024, we had no bicyclist deaths. And so if we invest in the right way and we connect in the right way, lives are saved. And if you look at, for example, when I directed our department to prohibit right turns all around the city, my email box was full because people don't, but we're saving lives. And that's how we're going to have to do it. We have to adjust with the new forms of transportation. We have to look at the technology is changing, and we have to make sacrifices. And these are the decisions that an executive has to make. These are tough decisions, but they're the right decisions, and that's how we lead. We lead with safety, reliability, and connectivity.
Thank you. The sort of next batch of questions has a lot to do. There's a lot of interest, both from audience members and from our co-hosts, to do with parks and green spaces. So the first one, and Mr. Hurley, you already alluded to this a little bit, but one of the
some tree questions, man.
Yeah, one of the first and recurring questions had to do with trees, and in particular, Birds Connect Seattle brought up the fact that trees are among the most important natural features in our urban environment that have significant implications for climate resilience, social equity, public health, and biodiversity conservation. And Seattle has a goal to grow our canopy cover to 30% by 2037, but recent assessments show that we're moving slightly backwards down to 28.1% or so in the most recent survey, and with worse canopy cover losses in communities of color, and there's currently not really a clear trajectory or roadmap to correct that. So starting with you, Mr. Harold, do you believe that Seattle can meet its canopy and equity goals, and if so, what specific actions will you take to get us there?
Yeah. First of all, I appreciate the question because we have to understand how we're able to ascertain all of this data. Because we are now measuring it. What I said to my cabinet is we have to show our soft underbelly to everyone in this city with respect to tree canopy, period. That's why we have to renew it. No one asked us to renew the tree canopy, and it's still a work in progress. I didn't want an interim tree ordinance. So what we did is, number one, we tripled the protections on the number of trees. So the answer to your question is yes, we will get there. That's why we put that goal in place. We increased the number of trees that we're actually measuring from 22,000 to 70,000. We clamped down on removals. In the old ordinance, you could remove 3 trees per year. 3 per year. Now you can only move 2 trees every 3 years. We mandated replacement from a 3 to 1, and we found out that the loss of trees were not so much because of development as people thought. The loss of trees was on city property. The city was the biggest culprit in losing trees, and once again, we were not measuring on either our property or private property, and that's what we're doing now. In order to improve tree canopy, we have to measure it. We also decided on our 3-for-1 replacement. Remember, you have to play the long game with the trees. So every tree we now lose, we will replace 3-fold. If you look at and I hate being punitive, but we significantly enhanced the penalties for those that are violating our law. We've had developers have to pay up to $75,000 for some of the work that we didn't want. And the other thing we're doing is we're now growing our own trees here in Seattle. We're locally sourcing them. I've just given you a few high-level components because at some point I also want to talk about what we recently had come up with this conservation easement incentivizing programs on your private land, which has never really been done here in this state or in many cities. And this is sort of groundbreaking in order to protect tree canopy on private residences.
Thank you. Ms. Wilson, same question to you.
Yeah, so I live up at the top of Capitol Hill, which is both one of the densest areas in the city and one of the areas with the most beautiful, old, mature tree canopy. And I feel so privileged to live up there because it is wonderful to be in this urban environment where there are grocery stores, there is transit, all of those things that come with dense apartment style living, but then we also have all these beautiful trees. So I want people around the city to be able to live, to be able to live like that. I've definitely heard a lot of consternation on the campaign trail this year about the rate of the loss of our tree canopy and especially our mature trees in lots under development. This definitely concerns me, and I really want to dig in and understand more how we can adjust our city policies to prevent the loss of mature trees while also getting the housing density that we need. And I think we really need to both densify our city and have our city be green. And so I'm eager to dig in and figure out what changes we can make to pursue that. I also have heard the thought that we should have a Department of Urban Forestry that our kind of tree policy should be separated out from SDCI. I think this is an interesting idea and one that is worth exploring. I think I'd like to look at the way that some other cities have done this, maybe successfully. And also believe that we need to do a lot of tree planting, especially in neighborhoods that are already heat islands and lacking good tree cover. I think we can explore creative ways to use some of our public space, including maybe parking spots in some areas to increase tree cover. And also we need to care for street trees, right? I mean, up in my neighborhood, I know the birch trees are all dying. That's a complicated issue that has to do with climate change, but I believe really we need to pay attention to the health of our trees as well.
One of the big questions that was brought up by Seattle Parks Foundation, and also like really sort of emphasized by the Mountains to Sound Greenway Trust, was that the fact that in the next 2 years, there will be a decision around the Seattle's Metropolitan Parks District levy and its renewal. And over the most recent 6-year budget cycle that has gone through, the levy funded around $780 million in parks projects, community center improvements, and increased programming. And Ms. Wilson, we'll start with you. If you were elected, how would you approach this levy? And what priorities would you identify for the levy? And would you support it going to the voters if it needed to be increased?
Yeah, I think this is a really important opportunity. And you know, in my career, I've been a community organizer and a coalition builder, and that means bringing people together and making sure that people who often feel that their voices are not heard in City Hall or that they're not part of the processes that determine the policies that affect their lives are at the table. And so I think in thinking about designing the next parks levy, I would be doing that work, right? To bring in stakeholders, to bring in people in neighborhoods around the city to really understand what improvements people want to see in our park system. And you know, I think some of the things that I think about are in terms of our community centers. I think that we need. I mean, these are great community assets, right? I live up near Miller Community Center, and I take my daughter there all the time. We have some great playgrounds in our parks, right? And so what can we do to make all of our parks great places for families and make sure that we have the funding for programming in our community centers as well? I also think, and I would certainly be open to increasing the size of the parks levy if there is appetite for that. You know, another thing that I think is worth looking at is our golf courses. And I know that this is a controversial subject, but you know, we have the Jackson Park Golf Course, and I know that there's a lot of neighbors around there who would love to take a look at what it would look like to maybe change the use of that land. And again, that's going to be a big conversation, but I really think that that's one that's worth having.
Mr. Harrell?
So to answer your question directly, yes, I'd be open to increasing and putting it to voters if that's sort of where the conversations lead. We have to be very open and honest about parks and park centers right now. You know, when you look at where cities became sort of their identity, many cities didn't grow as we did with using community centers and parks as a means of recreation. A lot of them just didn't go that way. This is a means to, it's almost an educational tool for us to learn more about each other. Community centers and parks are community building. We're not dancing on this, what is this, just a meeting room. We're building community right now. And so I think the new conversation about what we do with parks is we look at it, we redefine it. Right now with Trump's madness, with what we see, the need for a community right now is better. So what do I mean by that? That's why we're creating resiliency hubs for people. That's why we teach climate change. That's why you see park rangers walking around here, because I want our parks to be safe. It's hard to build community when you're unsafe. So when we look at investments, we're looking at what's the new, what are we building for in the future? The fact is we have these huge basketball courts, and my wife remembers when our sons and daughter would play in these huge basketball courts. I would say that seems to be sort of a wasted space as well. There's so much we can do here for some of these kids. We could have tutoring, we could have mentoring, we could have counseling. When we put in our school levy, for example, we put in a lot of mental health counselor, 34 health-based centers, but we also said these are our new health spaces as well. So the new conversation on our investments aren't going to just be parks and playfields and ballparks. That's cool, but we want to build community around it, and those are kinds of investments I'd like to see.
Awesome. I mean, this question will be for both of you, but Mr. Harrell, you brought up this question of like safety and then the need to be able to feel safe if we want to build community. Seattle Parks Foundation and Mountains to Sound also brought up this reality that every summer there's an increase in criminal activity in parks, and this is associated both with heat and many other things. But what is your position, starting with you, Mr. Harrell, what is your position on addressing public safety in parks and open spaces, and what ideas do you have to support keeping parks safe, lively, and open to all?
Well, that's our primary responsibility. If you look at our charter, we are chartered to keep you safe. And so under our administration, I have to admit, full transparency, when I became mayor, we had lost over 320, 330 officers. That's 1/5 of my police force. We have 5 police precincts. That means I have to operate a city with nearly 800,000 people with 4 police precincts. The good news is we've changed systems. We've changed how we recruit. We're getting 10 applications a day. We should have about 150 officers this year. We are breaking all levels in terms of our recruiting efforts. We're also investing in an unarmed response, a care department. We will double the number of care departments, community assisted response and engagement. These are people that will go out to a mental crisis situation. They are masters of de-escalation, and you don't need a gun and badge going out for that. You see our park rangers here. We've significantly increased our park rangers. We want a public safety presence, but I like to hire people from the communities, so they know your communities. So that's our charter responsibility. The fact is homicides are down, property crimes are down, serious crimes are down. My police officers are getting 5 guns off the streets a day. 5 guns a day. So this is tough work. I've had to right the ship in a city that was caught up in the defund movement. Police were demoralized. They were quitting left and right. Now I have a superstar and a police chief in Sean Barnes who said he will go to jail to fight against what the federal government is doing with ICE. I have that kind of leadership in place. I met every police officer in every precinct, sometimes 4 a.m. in the morning, 11 p.m., and saying, I need you to be the best at what you do. And I need you to love your community the way I love this community. So I want this place to be safe. It will be safe, and that's the trajectory and the floor that I've built for us.
Thank you. Ms. Wilson?
Yeah, this is a really important question, and as someone who takes full advantage of our parks with my young daughter, definitely the public safety issue is one that's personal to me as well. I would say that a large part, certainly not all, but a large part of the public safety problem in our parks is related to our crisis of unsheltered homelessness and also to our drug crisis. In Cal Anderson Park, in my neighborhood, there are kind of persistent encampments which are often swept, but then they come back the next week. This is one of the reasons why I jumped into this race, is because I have been so disappointed by the approach to homelessness which this administration has taken, right? We have lost shelter every single year that the current mayor's been in office. Actually, we might now have a net increase of, I think, 13 shelter beds is what I've heard. So, we have 2 homeless people in Seattle for every 1 shelter bed. And we have thousands more people sleeping unsheltered on the streets today than we did 4 years ago. So this is really unacceptable, and it contributes to our public safety problems, because when the city's current policy is to sweep people around the city without meaningful offers of shelter and support, and there was a very good article in the Seattle Times that I encourage everyone to read if you haven't recently, which basically demonstrates that we are not giving meaningful offers of shelter and support. We are simply shifting people around, and that destabilizes people, right? So now instead of sleeping in a tent, maybe they're not even sleeping in a tent, they're sleeping on a bench, right? And if someone has complex needs related to mental illness or drug addiction, they're more likely to behave in ways that are aggressive and contribute to our public safety problems. So we urgently need to open new emergency housing and shelter. We need to shift to a model, and we have models that we know work, but we need to shift to a model where we're actually getting people inside with the shelter and support that they need.
1 minute response. I know this isn't a debate, but when there are misfacts stated, I'd like an opportunity to say the truth. So I'll defer to you, though, sir.
Yeah, I'll allow it. I'm going to ask a follow-up for Ms. Wilson as well, but you can.
So it's very clear. I try to use data as much as I can. In 2020, there were 2,078 shelters. In 2025, there are 3,025 shelters. The city has not decreased shelter. What I think my opponent is referring to is perhaps shelter overall. The fact is we have, in 2023, we had 2,204 accepted shelter referrals. But here's the reality. The defund movement that I mentioned earlier, my opponent was one of the champions of that defund movement. And the question was about public safety. It wasn't about homelessness. And I just feel it's a little disingenuous when I have to talk about what I've had to rebuild because of that movement. That is a direct response to the issue of safety. The fact is that homelessness in our country has gone up 18%. Almost 1 million people are homeless. It's gone up in the state. It's gone up in the county. This is a serious crisis, and we've been working on this issue for years and years and years, and I don't denigrate anyone trying to do this work with me, but it's very easy to sit on the sidelines and criticize the work that people are doing.
Thank you. Yeah, and I'm going to ask a follow-up for you, Ms. Harrell, because, yeah, this is...
Ms.
really
Harrell? Ms. Harrell's right there.
Sorry. Thank you, Ms. Wilson. Because, yeah, this is just a chance to talk about, specific policies for your campaign. So I'm going to ask again, because you were talking more about the current administration's policies, but what is your position and what ideas do you have if you were to be elected to support, keeping parks safe and addressing this question of public safety?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So in addition to meaningfully addressing the homelessness crisis and getting people inside, I do think that we need a more consistent official presence in our parks, right? And that can be park rangers, that could be police, and then of course we have we have our care team, non-police responders, and then we have a number of nonprofits that have street outreach teams. And so making sure that we do have more of a consistent official presence, and on the police front, kind of enforcing guidelines of behavior in public space. So I do think that we need that. I'll say another issue which I think is kind of related to this is our public restrooms and public restrooms in parks, and making sure that those are open and safe and clean and usable, and that will be another high priority for me as well.
Awesome. Thank you. You both in different ways, I guess we're alluding to this because of this question of the homelessness crisis and epidemic, which relates directly to this affordability crisis that we're facing in the city and that really is affecting cities nationwide. So how will this is going to be a question obviously for both of you. We'll start with Mr. Harrell. How will you use the comprehensive plan to accommodate growth in Seattle in a way that improves affordability, reduces emissions, retains tree canopy, and provides access to efficient transit while retaining neighborhood character and vitality?
Sure. So that is the challenge, my brothers and sisters in this room. That is why we decided to implement a tree ordinance, because I knew we were preparing for the comp plan. And our comp plan allows for 330,000 units. We looked at the 84 square miles of this city and said, where is it a smart place to build? We looked around transit-oriented development. We developed a neighborhood center scheme, and we looked at the areas where we thought growth should occur. And we doubled the amount of the last comprehensive plan, and we were very aggressive there. We had to realize that Seattle is the 4th fastest growing city, and this is a blueprint for 20 years. And I told people when we looked at some of the parking requirements that weren't in there that cars are going down. I looked at the statistics on the number of people that are not using cars, like our children who take transit, and sometimes they'll car share, Uber, Lyft, that kind of stuff. So the fact of the matter is that we have invested over $1 billion in affordable housing. Right now, as we speak, we have the largest budget in the city's history at $350 million. And I remind you, I've had a $642 million deficit since I've been in office. I wasn't given the hand of some of the other mayors. My first day in office, I said, give me the checkbook, and we're 150 in the hole. But housing is critical. The other piece of that is we're cutting the red tape. If you look at the program, the housing project like near Burgermaster or in the U Village, we cut down 2 years on design time. And you might have recently heard that we hired Brooke Bellman, who used to be the former CEO and Deputy Director of Sound Transit, to head up SDCI, who's a superstar in helping us cut red tape. So we have the right investment strategy, we have the right comp plan, and we have the right investment tools in place to cut the red tape. That's how we're going to address affordability. And there are other aspects to it too, in terms of your light bill, your water bill, all of these other components of making the city affordable. On other questions, perhaps I could tell you what we're doing there.
Ms. Wilson?
Yeah, this is a great question, very important, obviously, as we're planning for our city's future. And, you know, we know that one of the reasons why we're facing the affordability crisis, the housing crisis that we are now facing, is that over the past 10, 20 years, the growth of our housing stock has not kept pace with the growth of our population, right? As the tech sector in Seattle has exploded, as people have moved here from around the country for all kinds of reasons, our housing has not kept up, and that's one of the things that has driven our rents up and our home prices up. So I believe that the comprehensive plan that our current mayor proposed does not go far enough in creating capacity for increased growth around the city. You know, the initial draft that was handed down to the mayor's office from staff included many more neighborhood centers than ended up in the final proposal. We will have an opportunity next year to revisit the question of adding more neighborhood centers around the city. That is something that I support, and these are areas where multifamily building is allowed. Another concern that I have with the proposed plan is that it really concentrates new multifamily development right on busy arterials. And so these are streets that are often not safe for pedestrians, noisy, where the air is not great. And so that is where we're expecting lots of new renters to live. So I believe that we need to expand kind of the walkshed, kind of the definition of near transit, where you're allowed to build multifamily housing, so that it extends maybe 5 minutes walk from a transit stop. I believe we can do more with tweaking our neighborhood residential zoning in a way that will incentivize and or require working around trees and creating green space while still getting the density that we want. And I also think that we can do more to enable homeowners to subdivide their homes and also build ADUs and DADUs in their yard in a way that allows people to avoid displacement and that enables multi-generational living and can kind of increase density in a way that neighbors are determining for themselves.
Thank you. This sort of the last question that I have for you all about, you know, this question of the environment, both built and natural, has to do with biodiversity conservation and integrating it with climate action. Because from Birds Connect Seattle, they mentioned that there are signs that native biodiversity is declining in Seattle, both in terms of the birds counted in birding surveys and the salmons that are passing through locks, as well as the southern resident orcas in the Puget Sound. And these losses reflect the sort of mutually reinforcing crises of climate change and biodiversity. And while the city is obviously making great strides in efforts to address its approach to addressing climate change, biodiversity loss, however, has been given comparatively less attention. So starting with you, Ms. Wilson, what specific actions would you take if you were elected to better integrate biodiversity conservation with climate actions, and what kind of measurable goals would you set?
Yeah, this is a great question, and I'm gonna kind of fudge it, which is embarrassing because my mom, who just came into town for a couple weeks, is an ornithologist, so I feel like I should have a better answer on the birds. But I'll say that, you know, I know that one of the issues, especially with our orcas and our salmon, particulates, plastic from tires is a big issue, and kind of runoff from our streets. And so the more we can do to shift our transportation system in a more sustainable direction and having fewer cars on our streets, it would be an important a direction to go in on that front. And then, yeah, in terms of biodiversity and birds, carving out places in Seattle with natural habitat, with native plants, places where birds can nest relatively safely seems very important. And so I know we do have a lot of great areas like that, making sure that we're preserving those areas and maybe building in more to our park system, and finding ways that you know, in any given neighborhood, even just a little kind of pocket park can become something which has more trees and bushes and habitat that is appropriate for birds to nest in, and you know, paying attention to what kind of plants we're planting. And yeah, I would love to talk with the experts on this, and let's make a plan.
Awesome. Mr. Harrell?
I'll address it by saying that I acknowledge the concern that there hasn't been enough talk about that. In my recent executive order, we actually looked at some other issues. We looked at, in addition to tree canopy, we looked at disease and pests, the bronze birch borer and the spongy moth and those nasty little things. So we tried to do a deeper dive on other issues that affect tree canopy. I don't think we've given enough attention to some of the other biodiversity issues, and so I'll take that back to the shop. We try to do it in many of our discussions. We try to meet with, and you know, our administration are known for meeting with you advocates. That's why we come to community centers. That's why we have town halls. And thank you for your advocacy. So I will relay this back to our Office of Sustainability and Environment. And by the way, I think we're coming to an end, right?
We'll have one more question.
Oh, you know, one of the things that there's been some suggestions from you that we take some of our enforcement out of SDCI, but I don't think people that fully understand how it really works. So I look at SDOT and parks and all those that sort of touch trees, so to speak, and they all report into OSC. And OSC sort of governs the pace by which and the measurements by which we are doing. But I'm giving that some serious thought too about taking out of SDCI. So your message resonates. And with respect to biodiversity, I think we could do better there, and we commit to doing better. So we'll make sure our doors are open. And even in our recent executive order, when we looked at pest and disease control, we probably could have very easily, I could have directed them to do that as well. So we'll do better there.
Awesome. Yeah, and this last question, because these previous ones, both when it came to green space and those questions around transportation, we're largely thinking about, to some degree, mitigation and how we reduce emissions in the long term to reduce the long-term severity of climate change. But obviously, there's a lot of climate impacts that are affecting us right now and will continue to affect us going forward. So thinking about those impacts specifically, if you are elected, and we'll start with you, Mr. Harrell, how will you prioritize adaptation to climate impacts that we're already experiencing and will continue to experience, such as extreme heat, wildfire smokes, and flood risks associated with both sea level rise and extreme storms?
Yeah, so that's why we required an update of our climate action plan that hadn't been done since 2012, and we hit that head on. For example, out in the West Seattle, where we're dealing with some of the king tides that were sort of unprecedented. We look at the effect on communities, many underrepresented communities. And you also look at, in my recent executive order and in our climate action plan, our race and social justice component to it. We put a hard lens on those impacted communities who are impacted the most. So our climate plan sort of addresses that. We try to integrate. The fact is the science is working against us right now. And I think your first question was the most profound question, what can cities do? So we start off with trees. We looked at our building emissions performance standard, which again was a weird time to talk about requiring buildings to be climate friendly. But we took it on even at a time where buildings were vacant. When you look at our, in our transportation levy, when we use the word resilience over and over, we talked about climate strategies in a transportation plan. So we will continue to lead the way. We'll continue to invest, and we'll continue to listen to advocacy groups. And this is, again, where we are leading the way. If you look at, again, a lot of the recognition we've gotten for the great work in our Office of Environmental Sustainability. We should lead the way in electrification, too, by the way. We're one of the few cities that generates their own power. And you look at our FERC renewal license, you see all of the stuff we're doing for salmon recovery. I mean, this is a multi-billion-dollar deal that we are negotiating. I have to spend a lot of my time up on the upper Skagit and lower Skagit and with the Snohomish and other tribes, making sure that they are the original peoples. And so what we're doing is you all are negotiating a multi-billion-dollar deal for salmon recovery and restoration of habitat on behalf of the city. And I just happen to be negotiating on your behalf.
Thank you, Ms. Wilson.
Yeah, I think this is a very, obviously a critical question as more and more of our neighborhoods do begin to feel the impacts of climate change. Back in 2021, we had a heat dome in which over 400 Washington residents died, mostly seniors and vulnerable adults in their own homes that lack air conditioning. So we need to make sure that we are expanding access to clean air and cooling in the context of heat domes, in the context of wildfire smoke. I think one thing that we can do on this front is do some work to figure out how we can accelerate heat pump conversions. and help people to install more heat pumps in their own homes. There might even be a solution for renters on this front. I think that's being looked at in some cities around the world, which would be really great as a renter, I think, speaking there. Yeah, like what can we do to bring this life-saving clean air into homes and workplaces across Seattle? We know the city is beginning to turn city-owned community centers into climate resilience hubs. I think that's great. I support that work. I want to make sure that we're doing that in all community centers around the city. I think we could also explore how the city can help community-based organizations make clean energy and climate resilience upgrades in their buildings too, right, in their community and cultural centers around the city. South Park flooding is a big issue, and that's a really tricky one. We have people living down by the river whose homes have been flooded or at danger of being flooded again as water levels rise. So there's some really sensitive work to be done working with that community to figure out what the best solutions are there, whether that is relocation or what, but that's a really important area of work. And in general, I guess I'll just say that I am committed to collaborating with and supporting community groups in neighborhoods around the city, especially the ones that are feeling the greatest impacts from climate change, to work toward better health outcomes and climate resilience.
Awesome. Thank you. I think we have time enough for you all both to have like 1 minute if you want to have any sort of like closing statement before we like fully move on into a break. Mr. Harold, do you want to start?
Sure.
Anything?
Well, I need to thank all of you. We're up here because we're talking. I mean, you guys weren't nodding off or anything. Man, you believe in democracy. You believe in our city. I'll stand up. Thank you. This is a tough job. I make no mistake about it. I love the job. I was built for this job. I try to lead this city with how I love my wife has been here. We're going on 4 decades. We went to college together. With kindness, with integrity, with tenacity. You have to make tough decisions. I want to clean up the park. I don't want syringes on the park. I want your kids to be able to say, I want our grandkids to be able to play there. But I also want to shelter people. And I realize they are slipping through the cracks. We're a wealthy city, but we're not a great city unless we take care of those that are unhoused. Dealt a pretty tough hand. But I commit to you, I need 4 more years to finish this job that we've done. We've got the funding through the transportation levy. We've got the funding through the housing levy. We tried to set up a regional approach on homelessness, but it's just not working. I will either term.
That's a minute.
Man, I was only halfway through, brother.
I know, but you only had a minute.
Thank you, and I ask you to vote for me for 4 more years. Thank you very much.
Ms. Wilson?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you all for being here tonight. I know there's a Mariners game on. Are we winning? I don't know.
We're not?
Oh, no, sorry. I shouldn't have asked. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, real quick. So I've lived in Seattle over 20 years, and my husband and I moved here in 2004, and now we're raising our daughter here. And I love this city so much, and I want it to be a place where my daughter can grow up and build a life if she wants to. And right now, that vision feels very far out of reach. Right, everything is so expensive. We have so much work to do to make the city a place where young people, elders, working families can thrive, and that is the work that I want to do. And that's the work I've been doing for my whole career as well. And the reason I'm running for mayor now is because I believe that this is the best thing that I can do in this moment to advance the same aims that I've been fighting for my whole career. And that is working in partnership with communities, with ordinary people to get involved and to amplify our voices and make our city and our whole region a place where working people can thrive. So thank you very much, and I would be honored to have your vote.
Awesome. Thank you. Amazing. Thank you both so much. Could we get another round of applause for the candidates? Awesome. We'll have time for about like a 5 to 10 minute break, and then we'll regroup for the King County executive candidates in their forum. Okay, so we already heard, obviously, from our Seattle mayoral candidates, and now we're going to hear from our candidates for the King County Executive. We have Ms. Claudia Balducci, who's one of our candidates, and the other candidate, Girmay Zahalai, couldn't make it, so we have Toshiko Hasegawa as our representative. And it's going to be the same format that we saw in that sort of first round, where there's going to be a series of sort of like 10 or 11 questions, depending on time, where they'll each get 2 minutes to respond to those. And if I have to ask any sort of clarifying questions or follow-up, they'll get an additional minute for a follow-up. But yeah, again, it's really just a forum for folks to give a chance to talk about their specific policies. And to start out, I have a sort of general, broader question as to a sort of opening statement, if you will, for you both to introduce yourselves and your particular stance. And this is going to be the same question that folks heard me ask to the mayoral candidates, but I don't think either of you were here for that. So I'll reiterate it from the top. In this moment, when the federal government is gutting efforts to understand and address the climate crisis, at the same time the research is showing that the world is beginning to approach and surpass certain climate tipping points, how do you view the role of county government, and in particular the office of King County Executive, in advancing climate action? And Ms. Balducci, we'll start with you.
Thank you so much. And thank you all for being here. Thank you all who stayed. I understand we're the undercard on this particular round. I have been a public servant for over 25 years, and I have been an elected official for 20. I started as a city council member in my city, the city of Bellevue. And when I first got elected, I advocated with my colleagues to join several regional and national climate efforts. And what I heard back at that time was, local government can't do anything. This is a global problem. We're too small to make a difference. But I will say, County Executive Dow Constantine, when he came along and organized what we call affectionately the K4C, which is our collaborative where we work together, made the case, thank you, along with former city mayor Greg Nichols, that metro regions around the world, if we do our parts, where all the people live, if we do our part in all of our metropolitan regions, we can absolutely move the needle and make a difference on climate change. So I was very proud to be the mayor of Bellevue that signed on to the K4C when we first joined. And I came to believe that yes, we have a critical role. Now we're being left alone almost. We have the state supporting us, but regions are going to have to be the focal point of climate policy, both to push back on GHG emissions and make sure we try to meet our targets to avert the worst of climate change, and to implement resilience measures, because we are not going to avert all of the impacts of climate change. We're seeing them already. So King County and the next county executive have a critical role. I think the good news is we have a solid foundation of partnerships throughout King County with cities, with stakeholders, with lots of wonderful organizations where we are doing our part. And I look forward to the rest of the discussion tonight to talk about exactly what that looks like for the next county executive. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. Ms. Hasegawa?
Good evening, everybody. My name is Toshiko Hasegawa. I'm Port of Seattle Commissioner. I'm here tonight on behalf of candidate Girmay Zahalai, who is your King County Council member, currently representing District 2 and seeking to be your next county executive. He had a prior commitment tonight, and no, it's not the Seattle Mariners, another campaign commitment. And so I'm more than happy to be here on his behalf to talk about the subject that all of us are so passionate about. Thank you so much to all of our hosts and all of you for being here tonight. Councilmember Zahalai ran 7 years ago for the King County Council because he wanted to bring the sense of urgency that our communities deserve when President Trump was attacking our communities. Specifically, he wanted to make sure that he was passing policies that would hold federal enforcement accountable, and since he took office, he has been a leader in making sure that we are leading on progressive policies from here at home. He believes in the philosophy that a drop in the pond can ripple to the outer edges. And where federal government is failing and attacking some of our priorities, it is the job of local government to be able to lead on progressive policies and to show what political courage can and should look like. Right now, the Trump administration is dismantling sustainability funding, environmental justice, equity provisions, opportunities and contracts for minority and women businesses and disadvantaged business enterprises. All of these things that all of us here throughout King County and the city of Seattle value. And the role of the King County executive is to lead the charge, activate active lawsuits to be able to challenge the Trump administration. Councilmember Zahilai has a number of different ideas. We're running short on time for this segment, but I look forward to exploring them in greater detail with you all throughout the course of this forum. Thank you.
This obviously is going to be for both of you, but Ms. Balducci, you mentioned that there are already obviously going to be certain impacts of the climate crisis that are already at this point unavoidable. So my question, but I'm actually going to start with Ms. Hasagawa, is what are going to be your top priorities, or in your case, Greenway's top priorities, for addressing the growing threats that we see in King County due to climate change, such as urban heat islands, dangerous wildfires, smoke events, and increased pressure on our natural resources?
Thank you for the question, and I am going to do my absolute best to make sure that I am representing his voice and not my own on this. So he did send me with thoughtful notes that he wanted to make sure that I was able to convey to you all. Greenway, so sorry, I'm like trying to get them all together here. So I'm so sorry. So his core message that he wanted to share with you all is that as county executive, Greenway will prioritize a local Green New Deal framework that aligns with our state's Climate Commitment Act and advances a just, equitable transition to a low-carbon future. The CCA gives King County a critical opportunity to invest in climate solutions that both reduce emissions and improve the lives of our residents, especially those who are in historically overburdened and underserved communities. His top priorities are the clean energy workforce development, building decarbonization infrastructure, promoting transportation and clean mobility, including through electrifying our county fleets and developing mobility hubs in underserved areas, as well as investing in bike lanes, sidewalks, and safe routes to schools to cut vehicle miles that are traveled. He also wants to invest in climate resilience infrastructure like permanent resilience centers with cooling, clean air, backup power, and clean water in frontline communities. And he wants community-led climate solutions. He wants to dedicate those CCA funds to community-based organizations through participatory budgeting and support indigenous-led projects in land stewardship, regenerative agriculture, and urban tree canopy restoration.
Thank you. Ms.
Can I ask you
Balducci?
to repeat the question? Sorry.
Yeah, the question was, what are your top priorities for addressing the growing threats that we see in King County due to climate change, such as urban heat islands, dangerous wildfire smoke events, and increased pressure on our natural resources?
Thank you so much for that.
Yep.
So as I said in my opening statement, we are increasingly turning our efforts at the county level to resilience and response to the impacts of climate change because they are here. I would say, I would really recommend that you look at the county's strategic climate action plan. The King County gives me hope because we have been under Executive Constantine's leadership a real leader leaning into these kinds of issues. But I will say there are some areas where we need to do more. In the last few years, at the urging of one of the mayors of our suburban cities, I volunteered to lean into water and water quality issues. And I have to say that is a big area of concern as climate change impacts come here. Stormwater and the runoff that we get into our communities is going to drive flooding. It's going to drive water pollution, especially of the type that is very lethal to the salmon and wildlife in our Puget Sound and Lake Washington. And wastewater treatment is increasingly really struggling because the higher flows are overburdening the system. That we planned a system for a certain amount of water, and there's a lot more water that's flowing into it. So we are going to invest, and we're going to have to invest billions of dollars to upgrade all of this infrastructure, and there's a lot of good work going on. I just learned this week that some of our scientists at King County were the ones who helped to identify the problem with the tire dust that stormwater runs off into the lakes and streams, and they have now come up with a potential solution that's being tested that is showing a lot of promise. We can do a lot of good, but we're going to have to invest a lot of money, and the sewer rates and the stormwater treatment rates are not going to be enough unless we make them prohibitively expensive. So one of my first things I want to do, and I'm already doing, is helping to build a national coalition to work on funding for water infrastructure. And there were a lot more things, but I thought I picked the big one.
Thank you. One of the sort of big themes that our hosts tonight were really curious about had to do with transit and transportation. So a lot of the next questions are going to have to do with that. In particular, Transportation Choices Coalition brought up that the upcoming expansion to Stride, Bus Rapid Transit, and the Link Light Rail have the potential to help realize climate and mobility benefits, but only if King County coordinates service, land use incentives, and funding across agencies. And so starting with you, Ms. Balducci, what specific steps would you take to coordinate King County Metro, Sound Transit, and local jurisdictions to ensure that these projects reduce car dependence, cut greenhouse gas emissions, and support housing growth near transit?
Can I just start by saying I almost want to cry with happiness at this question, because when I first ran for office, I went into an endorsement interview with an environmental group that shall remain nameless, and they asked me about my strategies for climate change, and I talked about transit, and they said, that's not climate change strategy. I was like, yes, it is. It is a climate strategy. So first and foremost, I have dedicated myself for a couple of decades now to completing the big high-capacity transit system, our light rail system. I am so proud every time I see a train in East King County. I can't even begin to tell you. By the way, if you haven't driven across I-90 at night, I suggest you do it. You might see a train testing back and forth, finishing that key high-capacity transit system. Then, we've already started to work on making sure that local buses fill in the gaps and help get people into the system. We're still working on that, and we need to bring up the level of service at Metro, because while trying to make the whole network work together, we unfortunately end up creating transit deserts. And we need to make sure that there's fast, frequent, especially frequent and reliable transit everywhere in the places where people live, because if you don't need a schedule, if you can just go and stand at your stop and know that you'll get a bus pretty soon and it'll take you to the light rail, that's when people can really rely on the system and and leave the car at home. And third thing, I've been working with the cities, including City of Seattle, to make sure that our land use planning is focusing on transit densities near high capacity transit stations, because that's the puzzle. If you have people being able to live close to transit, then you unlock potential for economic upward mobility, and much, much more sustainable living in a very comfortable way that's really attractive to the younger generation particularly. I've got a 19-year-old who knows the heck out of an ORCA card but doesn't drive at all, no interest. So that to me is that's the key.
Awesome, thank you. Ms. Hasegawa?
Absolutely. So Councilmember Zahilai currently works regionally to address issues to be able to promote mass transit, because we recognize that the transportation sector is one of the primary emitters of greenhouse gas emissions, and one of the best ways that we can drive down those emissions is encourage people to utilize mass transit instead of being in single commuter cars. So he currently sits on the Sound Transit Board, as well as participates on the Puget Sound Regional Council Transportation Policy Board, where he has worked to be able to make transit fast, frequent, and reliable, including at dedicated bus lanes to make sure that we're reducing delays to encourage people to be able to utilize. He wants to center equity and service expansion and restore and expand service to neighborhoods that are most affected by service cuts, including during the pandemic. And he wants to improve late night and weekend service to support shift workers and non-traditional schedules. He also wants to invest in safer, more comfortable stops and shelters in underserved and transit-dependent communities. He also wants to make sure that we're continuing to expand to connect cities where we have great density of people who are living and commuting. One great example, he wants to say that we made history as the first trains in the world powered across a floating bridge, and it's a huge milestone for the 2 line. And as it connects us in 2026, I'll make sure safety and opportunity connect every community. Opening that connection is a high priority for me. He also wants to make sure that they're staying on time for West Seattle. Want to make sure I'm doing okay on time, or am I over? Oh, good. Regarding fare gates, he acknowledges that fare gates also have a role to play. They can improve compliance and potentially improve public safety. He says, but we also have to make sure that they don't create barriers for low-income riders or restrict access. He supports further exploration so that we can have more data and understand the trade-offs. But he wants to make sure that they're encouraging metro ridership levels and have lots of great designs for street design and road safety as well.
Thank you. One of the other, with regard to, increasing and promoting access and the use of mass transit and public transportation, especially with the new work that's being done on the 2 line, a lot of that comes down to, the placement of housing, as you both were sort of speaking to. So I want to ask this question about how will you use the Growth Management Act in concert with the King County Parks Levy and transportation and transit investments to protect natural areas and parks in and around communities to prevent sprawl and reduce emissions to meet climate goals? And Ms. Hasegawa, we'll start with you.
Sure, and one thing that Councilmember Zahilai is incredibly passionate about is pointing out that housing policy is climate policy. He says that land use is climate action. Thoughtful planning reduces sprawl, it lowers emissions, and preserves forests, farmland, and open space. Housing and environment are connected. Building affordable, energy-efficient homes near transit reduces the car dependency and also protects sensitive ecosystems. And he wants to add, equity is essential. Historically underserved communities must benefit first from green infrastructure and smart growth. He wants to champion smart growth and zoning reform, allow more multi-family homes in more places. He wants to build transit near jobs, and he wants to require climate-smart building standards and protect clean water and natural lands. But you asked about the Growth Management Act, and his core message here is that protecting our rural, agricultural, and natural lands is not just about saving open space, it's about fighting climate change. And as county executive, I will strengthen oversight, close loopholes, and ensure that protecting our rural, agricultural, and natural lands is treated with the urgency that it deserves. His priorities here are that policies are only as strong as their enforcement. We need departments responsible for oversight, like permitting, environmental review, and local services. He wants to make sure they're fully staffed and equipped to do the job right. We'll close loopholes, tighten timelines, and make sure that damaging protected land comes with real consequences. I'll also improve public reporting tools so that community members can help hold our systems accountable. And most importantly, we will collaborate with tribes, rural communities, and conservation organizations to guide how we enforce the rules and update our policies.
Thank you. Ms. Balducci?
Thank you. There's 2 sides to the Growth Management Act coin, and both of them are critical for climate strategy. One is that we must protect the undeveloped rural areas because that is where we have trees and forests and farmland, and this works for water quality and air quality throughout our community. Also, it protects the quality of life that we all love so much in this area. I have been a very strong advocate throughout my career for protecting the rural areas, and the other side of the coin, putting density and new housing within the urban areas, and particularly where we have transit supportive densities, because that is how you can create a community that allows for growth, allows for housing affordability so that we're not keeping the next generation of people and workers from being able to afford to live here, and gives them sustainable transportation. You know, the campaign trail has been a really interesting experience, and I have to say, this is my 3rd event today, so I might be a little bit more loosey-goosey than I would be normally. And I'm just gonna say, I had a wonderful conversation with a developer who has been trying for years to create a big development out in rural East King County, outside the urban growth boundary. And he told me that he was gonna support my campaign, despite the fact that I have opposed him at every step. Because he said, you talked to me, you heard me, you were honest about your position, and you showed up and took your vote. The other people on this board that was taking the vote, including my opponent, said they would vote one way and didn't show up. So you need people who are going to really fight, not make a long list of promises, but are really going to fight to protect the rural areas, and I will absolutely continue to do that.
Thank you. With regard to this discussion of rural areas and trying to promote densification and reducing the amount of sprawl, there obviously is a certain amount of sprawl at this point that is, irreversible, and the county is responsible for maintaining certain roads and bridges to support access to those rural areas. But Mountain Sound Greenway Trust, one of the co-hosts, and I brought up the fact that King County Roads and Services Division and the Department of Local Services have indicated that current trends would mean that by 2029, there would be little to no revenue to maintain those existing county roads and bridges, much less provide for the capacity for the inevitable kind of regional growth that will happen despite, the best efforts of either of you candidates were you elected. And so starting with you, Ms. Balducci, what will you do as King County executive to increase the revenues available for county roads before roads and bridges must be closed due to an inability to maintain them?
Thank you so much for that question. This has been a perennial issue since I ran for King County Council, and I have said every year that we are facing the fate of other counties in this state where some of the county roads have had to be churned up into gravel because they did not have the funding or the program to maintain county roads. It is a structural funding problem that came along with growth management. Growth management was the right policy, it is the right thing to do, but it's not perfect because we don't have the tax base to pay for the roads that are the county's responsibility outside the urban growth areas. The way our taxes are structured, only the people who live in those areas are taxed to pay for those roads, and there's not enough of them. There's not enough of a tax base. We have a funding source called the King County Transportation District. It is a separate government technically, but it happens to be run by the people who happen to be the King County Council, so it's ours. And we are having a debate right now about whether we should adopt an increase to the sales tax in order to stabilize, not fix, not upgrade, stabilize and reduce the level of degradation in our county roads. I believe we should very seriously consider that, but that we have to have a public discussion because we keep raising taxes. If we did this year, it would be our 6th tax increase this year, and all of them for really good reasons, but they do pile up. So I think we should have that discussion about whether to use that source. And the big question comes back to the question that underlies all of local government and is the biggest threat, in my view, to local government. We need to reform our statewide tax system so that we can pay for the things we need to pay for without breaking the backs of the people with the least ability to pay. I was having a discussion earlier today with some business people, some of our biggest employers. We've got to start getting people around a table and figuring out a path to a better, more progressive tax system instead of fighting and losing battles in Olympia year after year.
Thank you. Ms. Hasegawa?
Councilmember Zahilai agrees with Councilmember Balducci, and that the King County, at the Executive's Office and the Council, have both included it on their legislative agendas for years to reform the state's tax code and what King County is legally able to assess. Specifically, they've been seeking to lift the 1% cap, but with the shortfall that's happening in Olympia, the attack that's happening at the federal level, jurisdictions on every level are seeing shortfalls in their budget. And so he's going to continue to push for progressive tax reform. There are very difficult conversations in identifying what those taxing sources are going to be. And we have to pair that with the strategies of cutting waste, reprioritizing what matters the most, and protecting services that everybody counts on. It's what he's done, and it's what he wants to keep doing for everybody. When it comes to funding for streets specifically, this is another example of a wonderful opportunity for meaningful partnership with local jurisdictions to be able to identify what their needs are. There are also unincorporated areas within King County that specifically depend on King County to be able to lead on making sure that they have the design and the safe routes and the coordination that they deserve in order to be equitably served and get them to and from their destinations and where they need to go. So Councilmember Zahilai, is involved in those crucial conversations, and is very sensitive to the way that tax increases will have impacts on everyday people when margins are slim and hitting people at a hyper local and personal level.
Thank you. The next question is bringing us back to the question in particular of public transit and mass transit access. And in particular, the question of safety. Transportation Choices Coalition brought up that since the pandemic, King County Metro has made great progress on workforce recruitment and addressing safety concerns on transit. And recently, the county convened a regional safety task force to address safety concerns on transit. And as executive, I'm going to start with you, Ms. Hasegawa. As executive, what is candidate Zahalai's vision to build on these efforts to ensure riders and operators experience consistent, reliable, and safe service countywide, and what new accountability measures would you set to track progress and rebuild public trust?
Riders and operators, and we just want to just lift up the Metro bus driver who tragically was attacked while on the job and lost his life in the course of his public service. And his name was David Lynn, and Councilmember Zahalai was present at that funeral and attended the Amalgamated Transit Union convened a countywide task force, and I think we're seeing a reinvigorated joint effort interjurisdictionally to be able to address the issues of both rider and operator safety, and King County has every role to play with that. This is an issue that Sound Transit has been looking at, and has been looking at how do you balance enforcement and community safety without over-policing historically over-policed communities. And so you've seen a transition of fair enforcement to fair ambassadors, but continuing to take some of those lessons learned, making sure that there's infrastructure that makes it safer to be able to commute, including better lighting, more dependability so that you know when your ride is going to show up, that it's going to be there. And then for the service routes that are happening later at night, right, making sure that there are people intentionally deployed to stops. And most of all, if somebody calls for help, there should be somebody there to be able to respond, right? So it is an incredibly difficult and disheartening issue, but it's one that Councilmember Zahalai is committed to working on in collaboration with law enforcement, the unions, the operators, and communities.
Thank you. Ms. Balducci?
Thank you. Yeah, I have heard, as a transit advocate and champion, I have heard about safety on transit for a very long time from riders, from operators. But the death of Sean Yim in the U District in December of last year really galvanized attention in a way that caused us to stand up and say we need to do something better now. Our operators union, ATU 587, called a press conference the very next day and challenged us. The mayor was there, I was there, others, and we stood up and said we've got to turn to action right away. I was proud to be the leader at King County, along with our director of Metro Bus Services, to partner with ATU to create a transit safety task force. And I know everybody rolls their eyes when they hear a task force, another task force. But we pulled it together, and it was very well attended in the sense that we got all of the cities, mayors, law enforcement, human services professionals, because public safety problems are not just crime, they are also human service challenges. Rider advocates, transportation choices, all kinds of people. I want to say a couple hundred people together in a room, and we kicked it off. We had committees that did work in 8 different work stream areas, they call them, from security to non-security responses. In other words, how do we support people who are having challenges in public? Because public challenges and public transit challenges are one and the same. They come on and off the bus. Vehicle and capital approaches, all kinds of variety of approaches. And we just got the report back a few weeks ago. I heard it in my committee week before last. It is a long list, but a list of really great ideas built in partnership with leaders in this area. We're already implementing some of the ideas. We funded some new security, but now we have the roadmap. And now the next executive gets to implement that roadmap, and that is what I want to do. I want to continue this work so it's not a plan on a shelf. It is actual actions that will make people feel safe, because we can't meet any of our climate goals if people won't ride our system.
Thank you. The sort of flip side, if you will, of this question of safety, obviously we're talking about public transit and making sure that riders and operators both feel safe on there, but when we're thinking about as well as the other option of cars and commuter vehicles, there is still a lot of public safety questions associated with that when it comes to crashes and collisions. And so Transportation Choices Coalition also brought up the fact that King County has adopted a Vision Zero goal and is working with cities to advance safe streets. The county's Office of Law Enforcement Oversight has also raised concerns about how traffic enforcement can impact communities differently. As executive, starting with you, Ms. Balducci, how would you ensure that countywide safety initiatives such as speed management and investments in safer infrastructure reduce crashes and save lives while pairing enforcement with equitable strategies?
Thank you so much for the question. It's a lot for 90 seconds or however long we get, but let me say, when I was the mayor of Bellevue, in fact, towards the end of my time there, we had a situation where a driver misjudged a left turn. A collision ensued, and her car was pushed up onto the street and killed a toddler that was being pushed in a stroller by its mother. And this was just a trauma to the family, of course, but to the whole city. And as mayor, I sat in meeting after meeting asking the question, what can we do? We can't have this happen. We can't have this happen. And what I learned was that our streets, our transportation system is not designed for safety, it's designed for speed. And so that's what Vision Zero is. Vision Zero is an approach to get cities and jurisdictions to design their transportation systems with the acknowledgement that people are vulnerable. Our bodies are easily harmed, and serious injuries and deaths will result if we don't make the system kinder. And we make mistakes. So the system has to be built in a way that when we make a mistake, it's not fatal. So I started the Vision Zero program at the City of Bellevue. I kicked it off on my last meeting on the Bellevue City Council. I just dropped it on the table and said, it's yours now, please implement it. I pushed for much higher focus on safety at the Regional Council when I was president there of the 4-county Regional Council. We now have a regional safety plan, and we passed through millions of dollars in funding to local and smaller jurisdictions so they could build their safety plans and make their systems safer. And at King County, I sponsored, and we are in the process of implementing a path to Vision Zero, but beyond that, not just on our roads, but also we have public health under our jurisdiction. We have Harbor View. We have so many resources that could be brought to bear to make the whole system safer for everybody. This is a huge priority for me, has been for years, and as county executive, I will push harder because it's been very hard to get some of these departments to make it a priority. I will make it a priority.
Ms. Hasegawa?
This is an area that Councilmember Zahilai has really focused on, because representing District 2, it is home to the area within the county that has the highest number of collisions and casualties. Just last week, actually, crossing Mount Baker, crossing the street, we saw a man in a wheelchair stuck there, and police cars all around trying to assist him. It's chronic, and that's because of a failure in design that put the train right on the ground instead of lifting it up out of the air. And so, this is something that he's brought up on the Transportation Policy Board. He has been a leader in Vision Zero as well, and cares deeply about implementation. He wants to also acknowledge that transit safety happens, to your point, for those who are riding. And so he wants to point out that safety begins with stability, and that means making smart investments in affordable housing, mental health care, and supportive services, that people have the help that they need before crises happen. He wants to make sure that not only does it have the law enforcement that's there to do enforcement and assist, but that there's also the strengthened partnership with communities in addressing root causes, so that folks can work together to make neighborhoods and their transit system holistically safer for all people. Indeed, the Office of Law Enforcement Oversight oversees Sound Transit. They're on a contract basis, and so they have worked on handing out Know Your Rights pamphlets to riders, because we know that ICE is out in these streets attacking people. And he also wanted to mention improving safety and the design for the system, that he's actually collaborated with Councilmember Balducci and transit advocates in improving pedestrian and vehicular safety for at-grade stations in Rainier Valley and the east side. In his district at the Mount Baker station, he's brought folks together to promote proposals that will save lives.
Thank you. Shifting focuses, one of the other big areas that our co-hosts today were really eager to hear your both of your perspective on had to do with parks and public spaces because of the significant role that King County plays in maintaining those. And in particular, Seattle Parks Foundation brought up that King County has a strong history of protecting public lands while creating recreation corridors and parks. And starting with you, Ms. Hasagawa, as executive, how would you or how would candidate Zahalai guide the Parks Department and the Department of Natural Resources to continue to serve the public while addressing gaps in access to public parks and lands?
Well, part of environmental justice is ensuring that everybody has the quality of life that they deserve, and that recognizes that whereas transit hubs can be a place of great opportunity and prosperity, it is also typically also a place where there are heat bubbles. It's a place that feel the impacts of climate change first and earliest, and so that's why communities depend on canopy. They depend on public green spaces. Councilmember Zahilai gives the example of his mother who was not unionized. She was a public health worker, and in snowfall she got snowed in and couldn't make her way into work because the region did not offer the infrastructure, the resources to be able to clear the roads for her to get there. She loses out on that pay. So he points out how some of these policies really lead themselves towards the quality of life and the innate human impact these policies have for people and their livability. As county executive, he wants to use Climate Commitment Act funds to be able to promote clean energy workforce development. He's looking at the ability to be able to lead on some of the relief efforts that folks need, whether it's a cooling station, which is one thing that he's already implemented, and other emerging technologies. This is also a really critical place for interjurisdictional collaboration, where we have places like the port and the private sector innovating in alternative fuels. We are increasing our dependency on electricity with and so we want to make sure that King County is actively playing a role in facilitating the development of alternative fuels that can help prevent climate change to begin with, which will also lead to job opportunities for people. This has to do with part of his Green New Deal that he's introducing, but he wants a holistic approach to be able to address climate change, quality of life for people, and preserving parks and green spaces.
Thank you. Ms. Balducci?
Thank you. We talk a lot when we are at these forums about the basics that make life possible together: public safety, having a place to live, having a way to get around, having a job. Parks and open space and green space are a part of our climate strategy, but they're also a part of what makes life here so wonderful. We want life not just to be possible, we want it to be wonderful. I'm very proud of the King County Park System. In the last redistricting, I got my lines moved, and I get to represent Marymore Park now, which is so awesome. The best dog park in the world, as far as I'm concerned. And King County nearly lost our park system some years ago. It was going out of business until they came up with the idea for a parks levy, and we've now passed a parks levy several times. So thank you, voters, because you vote not just for Seattle parks, but for King County regional parks, and it makes our county such a wonderful place to be. A few things that I think are important about us and our parks going forward, and these are just a couple of many. When I was the budget chair at not the last parks renewal this past year, but the last one, we added aquatics back into the parks levy. We had gotten away from funding aquatics because it's very expensive, but all those forward thrust pools are getting old and they're starting to shut down. And again, thank you, voters. Now we have this wonderful aquatics grant program so that we can continue to have aquatics and pools throughout King County, and people can learn in this area where we have so much water to swim and to be safe. It's a wonderful thing. And I'm very, very proud. Our debates over levies at King County often break down to who benefits and who pays, the basic political question. When we did the last parks levy, we pulled together the cities and said, Too many areas in this county are underinvested in parks. South Seattle, South King County, too much asphalt, not enough green space. We want to over-invest. It's not really over-investing. It's making up for underinvestment in those areas. And the cities negotiated and said, for the first time that I can remember, it's okay. You can take more money out of some of our districts and put them into that area because that is what people need there. This kind of thoughtful, collaborative approach to making sure everybody has what they need, I think is something wonderful about King County that I would very much love to continue.
You both were talking about this question of equity, and equity in particular in the canopy cover and its impacts on public space, in particular with temperature and heat islands. Birds Connect Seattle brought up the fact that tree removal and canopy cover loss is occurring throughout King County and is threatening climate resilience, equity, biodiversity, and public health. And an evaluation found that 14 cities and all unincorporated areas of King County have minimal tree protection with no tree removal thresholds or replacement standards. And Ms. Balducci, do you see this as a problem the King County executive should address? And if so, what specific actions would you take in unincorporated areas and with the 14 cities that have weak protections?
Yeah, absolutely. Tree canopy is so important for so many reasons. Some of the top ones being air quality. Tree planting is a climate mitigation strategy. Water quality. Having trees and filtration that comes with the soil under the trees is a major path to clean water. And of course, it mitigates heat events. It makes for visual and emotional respite. They're wonderful things to have, and we should really make sure that these are equitably available. In our last SCAPS, Strategic Climate Action Plan, thank you, we made a plan to plant 1 million trees, and we exceeded it. And I think in the next one, we need to make a plan to plant 1 million trees in under-forested areas, under-canopied areas. Like, let us focus in those 14 cities and in the urban unincorporated areas that really lack trees. We don't have the ability to tell cities what to do. If a city decides in their own code to have whatever tree protections they have, that is their choice. But we can be a partner and we can provide incentives. We can help with forestry programs. We have a wonderful forester and forestry program we can help to build, to plant trees. We have partners in the private sector. The Master Builders has recently, because trees and housing have become kind of this dichotomy in some ways, if we build more housing, we're losing trees. The folks who build the houses have started a tree planting program. And what they're focusing on is planting mature trees, not just the saplings, but like a 10 or 15-year tree so that it will be a bigger tree sooner. They're not huge trees, but they are, you need equipment to plant these. You can't just go out and plant it with your hands. So I do think the county could have a big role. We have the only role in the unincorporated areas. That's our job, and we should go do it. And as executive, I would absolutely prioritize that. But we can partner with cities, especially the ones with smaller budgets, to help them do better in their communities as well.
Thank you. Ms. Hasegawa?
Absolutely. So Councilmember Zahalai believes that the Growth Management Act has a key role to play in this as well. He says that protecting our rural, agricultural, and natural lands isn't just about saving open space and preserving trees. It's about fighting climate change, preserving clean water, protecting biodiversity, and ensuring a healthy future for our current generations and the ones that come next. As King County Executive, I will strengthen oversight, close loopholes, and ensure that protecting all of our natural lands is treated with the urgency that it deserves. His priorities, as he mentioned earlier, was ensuring that the departments have the sight in the enforcement and oversight, because so much of your question was about the accountability aspect. Personally, I'm shocked to learn that there isn't a standard for tree removal and tree replacement, but there are examples of land stewardship plans that the King County could and should be able to assess and be able to implement, including the highest standard as recommended by Forterra, which is a 4-to-1 replacement standard. Additionally, as it relates to the Strategic Climate Action Plan, he says that its role is including to make sure that there's climate resilience for these communities. When you remove trees, it's impacting the people who live there and the natural ecosystem. The residents do include the flora and the fauna, and delivering equitable solutions that protect the environment of the future generations. He wants to ensure that there are grant guidelines and funding processes to support meaningful climate resiliency grants, and make sure that resources applied efficiently to maximize these resources' impacts across King County. Also, oftentimes what gets lost in this is the community role in actively having a seat at the table and having self-determination in when and how these decisions are made. He wants to invigorate the partnerships with community groups, local leaders, and technical experts, including some of the folks who are in this room, which are essential for effective climate solutions. Some of the best policies that we have seen in Washington State have been done at the guidance of climate policy leaders and advocates. Greenway values the expertise in the room and the work of the County Climate Office at King County, as well as all of its community partners, and he will work collaboratively to bring strategies in the Climate Action Plan to life to ensure that they're actionable as well as equitable.
Awesome. Our last question before we give you a chance for like 1 minute each for like closing statements of a sort. But you, Ms. Hasegawa in particular, you brought up this question of biodiversity and flora and fauna, and another question from Birds Connect Seattle brought up the fact that for more than a decade, King County's comprehensive plan has called for a strategy to conserve native biodiversity in a changing climate, and this recommendation first appeared in 2012 and has been repeated in all subsequent iterations and updates of the plan. But despite this policy leadership and the increasing urgency of climate and biodiversity crisis, this strategy has never been formally implemented. And so starting with you, Ms. Hasegawa, as county executive, would you or would Mr. Zahalai commit to creating King County's conservation strategy? And if so, what would it include and what timelines would it set?
Thank you for the question. And candidate Zahalai believes that conservation is the key part of housing justice and promoting the quality of life of King County, county-wide. Greenway is committed to delivering on the county's land conservation promises and ensuring that our forests and open spaces are preserved for today and generations to come. He wants to point out that the King County Land Conservation Program is focused on protecting forests, open spaces, and critical nature areas across the region. These efforts preserve the biodiversity, they protect water quality, they combat climate change, and ensure that future generations can enjoy healthy, accessible, clean, natural spaces. He wants to articulate that his priorities here include full support for land conservation. He is fully committed to the county's initiative to identify and protect critical forests and open spaces. He wants to deliver on promises. He supported the expansion of the county's future tax to fund land conservation and wants to ensure that these funds translate into real, tangible protection of the lands that are identified. And he wants to protect key lands, focus on safeguarding priority forests, habitats, and open spaces that have been carefully mapped and selected for the ecological, recreational, and community value.
Awesome. Thank you. Ms. Balducci?
Thank you. You know, in every campaign, I've run a few, in every campaign there comes a moment where you have to admit a little bit of ignorance and humility. When I first interviewed with that same group that didn't consider land use and transit a climate strategy, I was asked, what's your position on the city's proposed critical areas ordinance? And I had to say, the what? I'm well past that now. I know what a critical areas ordinance is, and I know its importance. But I think this is a really good question, and I'm going to take it as such. I picked up my phone for a second to look up. I couldn't remember the term, but there's this term for the fact that we tend, as human beings, to gravitate towards certain particular species and want to protect those. Is it charismatic megafauna? Yeah. The polar bears, if you will, right? And so I do think that we can fall, as government professionals, we can fall prey to this kind of thinking. I have spent a lot of time and energy, and I've gotten money invested in trying to save the kokanee salmon, the little red fish that make my district their home in all the world. We have worked really hard at salmon preservation. We tend to focus on that also because it is a food stock for the resident orcas. And so we focus on sort of like habitat in the sense of I'm trying to fix this reach. And we do amazing projects, by the way, amazing big projects that are preserving a habitat. The Issaquah Creek project that has been underway is incredible. But I hear this question saying that what we don't have is a systematic approach. I see nods, thank you. A systematic approach to biodiversity conservation, and that is something I will acknowledge that I need to learn more about and think about how to approach it, because I do think at the systems level is where we make the biggest difference. So I would love to talk to you and touch your birds and hear more about it. Thank
Awesome.
you.
Thank you. And we'll give you each 1 minute flat for a sort of closing statement, if you will. So Ms. Balducci, we'll start with you.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for being here, for being so attentive, for having such great questions and having this conversation with us tonight. I will just say I hope to earn your vote and your support to be the next county executive, because I want to continue and accelerate the work that I have been so proud to do, opening and creating much more transit in our county, opening and creating housing and homeless shelters and permanent supportive housing, being a leader on public safety, and also investing in hope and education and jobs and all the things people need to succeed, so that we need less crisis service, and road safety and all the things we talked about tonight, and especially continue our work on the environment. In this race, I am the candidate with a 20-year track record of taking on big challenges, organizing partnerships with our cities and government at every level, and delivering results. I want to continue to do that work here for King County, and I would very, very much love to earn your vote. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Ms. Asagawa?
Thank you again for the opportunity to be here with you all tonight. Candidate Zahilai is a first-generation refugee from Ethiopia who grew up in public housing. He knows what it is to not have the support that you need in order to be able to live your best life. But besides that, he was able to go on and be able to study at Stanford and work at some of the top law firms in the region, and work in the Obama White House, and today serve as chair of the King County Council. He has hopes to be your next county executive, to be able to pass it forward and give everybody the opportunities and the safety that they need to be able to not just survive, but thrive in this county. He is an incredibly strong candidate with key endorsements, including from the Washington Conservation Action, and he's endorsed by tribal leaders, including the Snoqualmie tribe, Puyallup tribe of Indians. He's incredibly proud of his track record for extreme weather policy, Joint Aircraft Emissions Task Force, and being able to empower communities with this self-determination they need. So thank you so much and for your consideration.
Awesome. Can we give another round of applause for our 2 candidates?
Can I say one last thing? One last thing. What Commissioner Hasagawa just did is very, very difficult. Let us appreciate her. Great job.
We're going to have a quick closing statement from Rebecca.
Thank you all for being here again. The ballots are in your mailbox, and so please fill them out, send them in, and I hope this has helped you with your consideration as you think about the various candidates tonight, and vote.